I, 30M, have been dealing with a situation that I never imagined would happen in my family. My father passed away 6 months ago after battling an aggressive form of lung cancer, leaving behind a substantial inheritance that included his house in an upscale neighborhood, significant savings, and most importantly, the manufacturing business he had built from scratch over 35 years. I have a stepbrother, Mark, 35M, from my father's second marriage to Sandra, 55F. My biological mother passed away in a car accident when I was just 3, and my father married Sandra when I was 5. She was working as an accountant at Dad's company back then, and apparently they got close while working together. Growing up, Mark and I had what I would call a decent relationship. We weren't particularly close since he was already 10 when our parents got married, but we got along well enough. We shared a room for a few years until Dad's business really took off and we moved to a bigger house when I was 8. Mark always seemed a bit distant and sometimes jealous of my relationship with Dad, probably because Dad spent more time with me, especially when it came to the business. Dad's company manufactures specialized industrial equipment, and he was extremely passionate about it. He started teaching me about the business when I was quite young. I remember spending countless weekends at the factory with him, learning about the machines and processes. When I turned 16, I started working there during summer breaks, learning every aspect of the operation from the ground up. By the time I was in college, I was already familiar with most of the business operations. I chose to study business management in college because I always knew I wanted to join Dad's company. After graduating, I started working there full-time, and by 25, I was practically running the day-to-day operations while Dad focused on expansion plans and building relationships with bigger clients. Mark, on the other hand, never showed much interest in the family business. He went to an expensive private college, got a degree in marketing, and worked various corporate jobs in different cities. He would visit during major holidays, but that was about it. Sandra always tried to get him more involved, constantly suggesting that Dad should give him an executive position in the company. She would often comment about how it wasn't fair that I was being groomed to take over while Mark was left out. But Mark always declined, saying he preferred corporate life and didn't want to work in manufacturing. Everything changed dramatically when Dad got diagnosed with terminal cancer last year. The doctors gave him about 8 months, and during this time, Mark suddenly became extremely interested in the family business. He started visiting every weekend, asking detailed questions about operations, profit margins, and client relationships. He even offered to quit his corporate job to help out, saying he had finally realized the value of family business. Dad was really happy about this change. Despite being in pain and going through chemotherapy, he would spend hours talking to Mark about the business. He had always wanted both his sons to be involved, and he saw this as his wish finally coming true. I was a bit skeptical about Mark's sudden interest but didn't say anything because it made Dad happy. A month before Dad passed away, when he was still lucid and able to have proper conversations, he called me to his room one evening. He told me he had updated his will with a family lawyer. He said that while I had put in years of work in the business, he wanted to be fair to both his sons, so he was splitting everything equally between Mark and me. The business, the house, his savings, everything would be divided 50-50. He made me promise to help Mark learn the business, saying it would be good for us to work together as brothers. I agreed because I knew how much it meant to him. After Dad passed away, we had the will reading at the lawyer's office. Sandra was there with Mark, and some other close family members were present too. To everyone's shock, the will stated that Mark would get 70% of everything, including controlling interest in the business, while I would only get 30%. I was completely blindsided because this was totally different from what Dad had told me just a month before. When I brought this up, pointing out that Dad had specifically told me about the 50-50 split, Sandra got extremely defensive. She started saying that I was trying to cheat Mark out of his rightful inheritance and that Dad had changed his mind because he realized Mark deserved more as the older son. She even claimed that Dad had told her he regretted spending so much time teaching me the business instead of Mark. Something felt very wrong about the whole situation. The family lawyer who had been handling Dad's affairs for over 20 years looked uncomfortable during the reading. When I spoke to him privately afterward, he confirmed that he hadn't drafted this version of the will. This was a completely different document from what he and Dad had prepared. I hired a private lawyer to investigate, and what we discovered made my blood boil. During Dad's last few weeks, when he was in the hospital and heavily medicated on morphine due to the pain, Mark had brought in a new will for him to sign. The nurse who was present during the signing came forward and told us that Dad wasn't even fully conscious when he signed it. She said Mark had told her it was just some urgent business paperwork that couldn't wait. When I confronted Mark about this, his response shocked me even more. Instead of denying it, he actually tried to justify what he'd done. He said he deserved more because he was the older son and that I had already benefited enough from Dad's attention over the years. He brought up how I had gotten to learn the business from childhood while he had to figure things out on his own. He even said that Dad would have wanted him to have controlling interest because he had more real-world corporate experience. I took all the evidence to our family lawyer. He was horrified because he had drafted the original will with Dad and knew exactly what Dad's wishes were. We filed a case to contest the fraudulent will, but Mark and Sandra are fighting back hard. They've hired expensive lawyers and are dragging the process out. They've also started a smear campaign within the family. They're telling everyone that I'm trying to steal Mark's inheritance because I'm greedy and can't stand the thought of sharing control of the business. Sandra has been calling relatives crying about how I'm trying to rob her son of his birthright. She's even suggesting that I manipulated Dad all those years I worked with him, making him favor me over Mark. Some of our relatives are actually taking their side, saying I should be grateful for the 30% since I'm the younger son. They're saying that Mark needs the money more because he has a family to support while I'm single. Others are furious with Mark and Sandra for taking advantage of a dying man. The family is completely divided over this. Sandra keeps sending me long messages about how I'm destroying the family and that Dad would be disappointed in me. She says I'm being selfish and that if I really loved Dad, I would honor the will he signed, regardless of the circumstances. I've had to block her number because the emotional manipulation was getting too intense. I know I'm right to fight this. What they did was not just morally wrong but illegal. But seeing how it's tearing the family apart sometimes makes me wonder if I should just accept the 30% to keep the peace. Then I remember how they took advantage of Dad when he was dying and couldn't defend himself, and my resolve strengthens. I refuse to let them get away with this. Update 1: The situation with my inheritance has taken an even darker turn. During our investigation, my lawyer discovered something that made all the pieces fall into place. We found a series of emails between Mark and Sandra spanning the 6 months before Dad's death, methodically planning how to change the will. What's most shocking is that Sandra was actually the mastermind behind everything. The emails revealed that this wasn't just an opportunistic grab during Dad's final days, they had been planning this for years. Sandra had been quietly pushing Mark to take more interest in the business, not because she cared about family unity, but because she wanted him to understand enough to take control when the time came. She had convinced Mark that since he was her biological son, he deserved the lion's share of the inheritance. We discovered that Sandra had been monitoring Dad's business dealings closely through her contacts at the company. She knew exactly how much everything was worth and had been documenting every instance where Dad had favored me over Mark. She kept a detailed record of how many hours Dad spent teaching me the business versus spending time with Mark, using this to fuel Mark's resentment. The emails were honestly disturbing to read. Sandra would write things like, "Your father never appreciated you like he did him, and we need to make sure you get what you deserve." She had been feeding Mark's insecurities for years, constantly reminding him that Dad had chosen to teach me the business instead of him, telling him that Dad never loved him as much as he loved me. But here's what really made me sick: they had already planned what they were going to do with the business once they got control. They had been in talks with one of our biggest competitors about a potential sale. The emails showed they had already met with potential buyers and were discussing preliminary valuations. The business that Dad had built from nothing, that he had poured 35 years of his life into, they were planning to sell it to the highest bidder as soon as they got majority ownership. When I confronted Mark with these emails, he broke down completely. He admitted that Sandra had been working on him about this for years. She had convinced him that Dad had robbed him of his rightful place in the company by favoring me, and that changing the will was just a way to correct this injustice. He tried to apologize, saying he got caught up in his mother's bitterness and revenge plans, but I couldn't even look at him. I shared these emails with our extended family, and the reactions were explosive. Most of them have completely cut ties with Sandra and Mark. Even Mark's wife, who had been one of his strongest defenders, was disgusted when she learned they had been planning to sell the business. She had no idea about any of this and moved out with their kids last week. She's staying with her parents and is talking about filing for divorce. Sandra's response to all this was both predictable and infuriating. She's now claiming that the emails are fake and that I fabricated everything to turn people against them. She's telling anyone who will listen that I manipulated the evidence because I'm jealous of Mark's success in the corporate world. This is ridiculous because anyone who knows me knows I never cared about corporate success. I was happy running Dad's business and maintaining his legacy. What really breaks my heart is thinking about Dad's final months. While he was suffering through chemotherapy and trying to make peace with his situation, his wife and stepson were actively plotting to undo everything he had worked for. Instead of spending time with him and making his last days peaceful, they were meeting with potential buyers and planning how to change his will. The nurse told us that during his last weeks, Dad would often ask for me when he was lucid, but Sandra would tell him I was too busy to visit, another lie she used to manipulate the situation. The lawyer says we have an incredibly strong case now. The combination of the nurse's testimony about Dad's condition when he signed the new will, the emails showing premeditation, and the evidence of them already planning to sell the business before Dad even passed away, it all paints a clear picture of their intentions. The judge has already indicated that he takes a very serious view of people taking advantage of terminally ill patients. Mark tried to reach out to me yesterday, saying he wants to make things right. He offered to withdraw his claim to the inheritance if I would forgive him. But I told him this wasn't about the money anymore, it was about how he and Sandra had betrayed Dad's trust when he was at his most vulnerable. I told him I never wanted to see either of them again. Some things just can't be forgiven. Update 2: The court case was finally settled today, but what happened in the courtroom changed everything. Mark showed up without Sandra and asked to speak to the judge privately. What he revealed in that meeting blew the case wide open and exposed an even darker side to this whole situation. Mark confessed everything and provided evidence that showed Sandra's manipulation went far deeper than any of us had imagined. He had found a hidden laptop in their house containing years of detailed plans. Sandra had been planning this even before Dad got sick. She had opened multiple secret bank accounts in Mark's name and had been slowly siphoning money from Dad's personal accounts for years, using her position as his wife to access his financial information. She had used Dad's medical condition and his strong painkillers to get him to sign multiple documents, not just the will. She had forged Dad's signature on several business documents that would have given her direct access to the company's accounts after his death. She had even prepared backdated papers showing that Dad had promised her partial ownership of the business when they got married. The most shocking revelation came when Mark explained why he finally decided to come clean. He discovered that Sandra had done something similar to her first husband before Dad. She had manipulated that situation too, gradually gaining control of most of his assets before divorcing him. The man had died shortly after, and his children had been left with almost nothing. Mark found this out when one of those children contacted him through social media, warning him about his mother's pattern of behavior. This discovery made Mark dig deeper into Sandra's past, and what he found made him realize just how calculating she had been all along. She had a history of getting close to wealthy business owners, both before and during her marriage to her first husband. Mark found old emails suggesting she had actually targeted Dad's company specifically, getting a job there to get close to him after learning about my mother's death. The judge invalidated the fraudulent will immediately after hearing all this. The original will, leaving everything split equally between Mark and me, was reinstated. But I told Mark I didn't want him to have any part of the business. He agreed and signed over his share to me in exchange for a cash settlement that was significantly less than what he would have gotten under the original will. He said he didn't deserve to be part of Dad's legacy after what he'd done. Sandra showed up at my house that evening in a complete rage. She was screaming about how I had turned her son against her and destroyed her family. She threatened to tell everyone about things I supposedly did when I was younger, claiming she had evidence of me stealing from the business as a teenager. It was all lies, but she was desperate and trying anything she could think of. I recorded everything on my phone and got a restraining order against her the next day. The most disturbing revelation came from Sandra's sister, who finally decided to speak up. She told us that Sandra had actually tried to cause problems in Dad's first marriage, to my biological mother. She had worked her way into a position at Dad's company back then and had apparently tried to create issues between my parents. After my mom died, she spent years carefully getting close to Dad before they finally got married. Learning this made me feel physically sick, thinking about how long she had been manipulating things. Some family members suggested that we should look into my mother's death more closely, but I shut that down immediately. I couldn't handle any more revelations, and dragging up the past wouldn't change anything now. Besides, I remember Dad telling me it was a clear case of a drunk driver hitting my mom's car, and that driver had died in the crash too. The whole situation has left me questioning every memory I have of my childhood with Sandra. Was anything real? Did she ever actually care about me, or was I just part of her long-term plan to get control of Dad's assets? Mark seems just as damaged by these revelations. Learning that your mother is capable of such calculated manipulation must be devastating. But I still can't forgive him for going along with her plans, regardless of how much she manipulated him. Update 3: Life has finally settled into a new normal, but the aftermath of everything still affects our family. The business is doing really well, and I've hired competent managers to help run it the way Dad would have wanted. I even implemented some of the expansion plans Dad had been working on before he got sick. Last quarter was our best ever, and I know Dad would have been proud. Mark moved to another state with his wife and kids after they reconciled. She had initially filed for divorce but decided to give him another chance after he came clean in court and cut ties with Sandra. He sends emails occasionally, mostly about his children and apologizing again for what happened. I respond politely but briefly. We'll never be close again, but I don't wish him any harm. He's working at a marketing firm there and seems to be doing okay. Sandra wasn't done trying to cause trouble though. Last month, on Dad's birthday, she showed up at his grave making a huge scene. She had apparently been telling people that I had somehow brainwashed both Dad and Mark against her. She brought some relatives I'd never even met before, showing them proof of how I had manipulated everyone. When security asked her to leave, she started screaming about how her husband and son had abandoned her, and they had to call the police. She tried to file a lawsuit claiming she was entitled to spousal support from Dad's estate, but her case was thrown out when our lawyer presented all the evidence of her fraud. The judge was particularly upset about how she had taken advantage of Dad's medical condition to get documents signed. After the graveyard incident, Mark finally cut all contact with her too. He sent me a long email explaining that she had been diagnosed with some mental health issues but was refusing treatment. He had tried to get her help, but she insisted that everyone else was the problem, not her. She's still convinced that she did nothing wrong and that we're all conspiring against her. I've moved on with my life now. I bought a house in a different neighborhood because Sandra kept showing up at my old place. I had to hire security because she still tries to contact me through fake social media accounts and sometimes sends people to check on me and report back to her. I keep all the evidence of her harassment in case I need to renew the restraining order. The business is thriving, and we recently landed some major contracts that Dad had been pursuing before he got sick. I expanded our production line just like he had planned, and our revenue has nearly doubled. Sometimes when I'm sitting in his old office, I wish he could see that his life's work is being carried on exactly the way he wanted. Some relatives still think I should forgive Mark since he came clean in the end and helped expose Sandra's schemes. They say he was just a victim of his mother's manipulation. But I just can't get past how he was willing to betray Dad when he was dying. He might have done the right thing eventually, but only after he got caught and discovered Sandra's past. Some betrayals you just can't come back from. I've learned a lot from this whole experience, mainly about how greed can destroy families and how you never really know someone's true nature until money is involved. I'm just grateful that I was able to preserve Dad's legacy and keep his business running the way he would have wanted. That's what matters most to me now.